Susanne Cleveland, welcome to Boston Confidential. Thanks for coming on with us today.
Hi, Barry. Good to see you.
I never see people on the show under great circumstances, and we're here talking about the Sandra Birchmore case. And there's been some recent developments in this case. Could you just tell us the name of the website you run regarding this case, Suzanne?
Justice for Sandra Birchmore. We have a Facebook group as well as Justice for Sandra Birchmore.com, a web page that's associated with information aspects to her story and even victim information for those who have suffered situations like this, information about explorers, facts about her life, and certainly a lot of information about the folks involved with her abuse and her.
This is really starting to get some steam underway in terms of investigation. But I think this started about 2010 with Sandra joining the Police Explorers program in Stoughton, Massachusetts.
So there's a little bit of a backstory behind the backstory, meaning that she was a young child growing up in the school system in that community with a single mother and a grandmother, where everybody's life was hectic and 9, 10 years old. Sandra is a very energetic and challenging a little girl and needed some direction in enrichment programs that would keep her occupied. So
Right.
at first in the school, her mother sought after for guidance and how to keep her daughter's energy channeled after school and in general. They got involved in some workshops. She was present for some of it, but with the workshops and the figuring out how to get your kid involved in positive activities, that branched off into Sandra's creativity and volunteering for things and getting into helping out with people around the school and the police. At this point, it might have just been ancillary programs and offshoots that the school resource officers were doing. She was everywhere. Pick me, I want a task to do, and were involved in everything and developed a fondness and admiration for everybody involved. And I think it was 2011 that the Divine Explorer program really started to take off. She was already 2 years into looking for. It's almost like it was created for her and exactly for someone like her. At that point, her
She
mother
was
was.
looking to belong and participate.
She was definitely looking for creative ways to implement her love of rescue workers, the police and military. She didn't have a father. She didn't have that profoundly strong male hero in her life. So she was looking to them. And it almost magically manifested in Divine's recreation of this. It was a stagnant program at the time.
His rank at the Stoughton Police at that time, Suzanne.
At that time, so in 2011, I think he was detective sergeant at that point in XO, the executive officer. So
So
he
he
was,
was second in command.
yes, second in command. And then from 2011, the Explorer program and him reinvigorating it under his creativity and incurring funds. He had rebuilt and turned it into an obstacle course, all these bells and whistles that kids would be, oh, hell yeah, I want to go participate in that. He made it into a makeshift police academy training camp kind of thing.
How old was Sandra when she joined the Explorers?
I think it was 14 when you could start, but at age 13, she was there as a gopher and
Yeah,
whatever she
helping
was
out.
allowed to participate in, she was around. It was almost like vetting her to just wait a little bit, kid, a few more months, and we'll put you in here. It was vetting slash grooming.
This program was led by Sergeant Divine, but there were 2 twin brothers, and I just wanna take this opportunity to say here, no charges have been filed, no criminal charges have been filed in this case. The accusations are absolutely horrible, but there's been no criminal convictions on anyone as of yet. She joins at 13 years old, 14 years old. This was led by Sergeant Devine and the Farwell brothers. Could you introduce us to them very briefly?
Yes, there is gray area in that part of the story, but I think that's by design, not by accident. The Farwells were not quite part of the program yet because they were 12. Their onset is in 1998. They were 12 years old. This is the first manifestation of the program before he turned it into the one that was most recent. They were there as 12-year-olds, same way that Sandra was, being gophers, being ever present, and being helpers in the program until they were able to participate. So under Divine's first part of the program, they were
Right,
12-year-old boys who then became, as soon as they were 14, they essentially were given carte blanche in the program. He made
right,
Matthew Farwell the deputy chief of the Explorer program, and William was a lieutenant. And at 14, 15 years old, these two were, there are documented stories about their, I call it reign of terror. They were basically using their power in the program to bust kids that they didn't like or to bully other people and basically be pretend cops, which escalated to a point where they impersonated police officers and were pulling people over on their own. I'm saying off the clock, not even during the program, out in the
right,
streets and getting in cars that didn't belong to them with their fake police uniforms and their fake
right,
guns and pulling people
right.
over. And part of that was taking them back to face the fire with Divine, who was their leader.
Yeah.
We don't fully know what that chapter looked like because all those records and stories and disciplinary incidents are unavailable.
How are they unavailable? Why are they unavailable?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'd like to ask whoever the investigative agencies are keeping this active. Somebody
Right,
would have had to end up with them. There is definitely an exploration into the hiring of Matthew and William Farwell as part of all the cases, the civil, the post,
right,
part of the tort allegations are that there was negligence in hiring. I was just looking at the Globe article that was the first explosion of this whole story. At that point, these guys were still talking. They didn't really think they were in any kind of trouble. So it,
right,
Matthew and William both make statements to reporters. Divine never stops talking, but that's another issue. Laura from the Globe points out that on the job application for Stoughton Police, Matthew Farwell puts that he has been a member of the police department in Stoughton since 1998.
right.
Thank God for putting that on paper because you gave us that's part of discovery. I don't know about you, Barry, but I don't think when I first created my resume or when I started to in my post college career aspirations, I wouldn't have put at 12 years old, I was babysitting for the neighbor's kid, or at 11 years old, I was delivering papers.
Right,
It's a very odd statement to say I've been a member
right.
of the police department since 12 years old.
Yeah, it is. Now
But
these
it's there.
Farwell brothers, they're twins, correct?
Correct.
And after high school and whatever they had done with the Stoughton Police Department Explorers, they went off to the military. They served in the military, correct?
Yes.
Came back and applied as full-time police officers?
I don't think their timetables are exactly the same, because Matthew's stint was short in the military, and William went on to be a bomb guy. He his sort of claim to fame and his draw, especially with the community and the school kids and the girls, is that he was something straight out of The Hurt Locker. You remember
Right,
that movie with Jeremy
I do.
Renner? That was utilized as part of getting everybody mm, onto the football field, and Williams coming to do a demonstration. He's putting on the bomb suit. He's got the dogs, the shock and awe of this badass military hero coming in. And he's here on his own time to hang out with you kids to teach you about his job and his career and
Right,
everything heroic he's done, which is another offshoot of the grooming process. Was him coming
right.
in. This is all volunteership. While
Yeah,
they're going through their various chapters, I think, was it Matthew that worked in Wellesley for 4 years, working
right.
for another police department? William went on to do a
Yeah,
lot in his combat veteran roles. He was out of pocket in that way for a long time, but he would
right.
come back periodically and check in with Sandra.
At a
Eh,
certain point after Sandra joins the explorers, she was mostly with him, and then afterwards, the Farwell brothers come back and take jobs in town. Is that correct?
No, Matthew was first. He got on, I think, in 2013. There were a couple of points where they apply and go through the screening process, but get passed over.
Right.
And then there was another round of hiring. Divine doesn't really want this to come out as part of the case that he was lobbying for these guys. He was endorsing
Yeah.
them. So he was
Yeah. He
coming
was
back and
definitely
saying, "Why did you pass over this guy? This is my guy." But while that was happening, he was moving up the chain and getting into that deputy chief role. By the time
yeah.
they reapplied, they were in like Flynn.
Right.
That's how that went. But Matthew was there. William was off being a war hero. By that time, Matt Solon connected with Sandra and developed a relationship and was intimate
Right.
with her by the time she was 15.
What is the first allegation of abuse? Is it when Sandra joined under Divine? Was the first series of abuse allegedly from Sergeant Divine?
No, he's been able to keep it at bay to a certain degree. But I would argue, and I think even going back to Brian Holmes's report, the internal investigation, there's a lot that points towards a bigger issue. Holmes is no dummy. If he's putting something in there, it's for a purpose, it's a reason. He makes reference to the fact that there's a file folder involved with Divine running the Explorer program, and but Divine was in charge of the records. When Holmes pulled them, there was a file folder with his accolades or whatever, Robert Divine's in that program. And he said that there were only two items in that folder, two letters. The first one was a 2012 or 2013 letter from Sandra Birchmore's mother to Divine, thanking him for taking Sandra in and giving her direction with her life and being an inspiration to her and her family.
Right.
I would argue that letter gives a date for the start of the grooming, for the start of the abuse, because the grooming process involves making the family lulled into allowing you more time with their child. I would argue that letter speaks to where the abuse began.
What a betrayal after getting a letter like that from parents, and you know what you're doing.
Let
I
me
think
tell you
all
what the other letter was. The other letter, I think, because Holmes tapers off in his description of the second letter, but I think that the second letter was the reputed love letter that the 13-year-old girl who had a crush on Divine wrote to him. And it was entitled Deputy Chief Divine, My Hero. And it was written by a young woman who was fond of him. And there was no signature, it was handed in anonymously, but it had to be submitted on a certain date. So again, that I think speaks to an abusive time frame.
could
And I just think it's
yeah,
weird that somebody was saving it. It's almost like he had it in his file as a trophy that he had love letter from a 13-year-old.
I think you're right. When did this all go off the rails at the Explorers program? In terms of the Farwell brothers, tell us exactly what happened, or as best you can, what happened with them? When did this go from some inappropriate, I can't even bring myself to say the words flirting. Is that something either young adults do among themselves or adults do among themselves? So I don't know what the phraseology is. When did he start? I guess it's grooming. When would he say the Farwells got serious about grooming, and when did it come to physical contact?
That's definitely hard to identify because being as prolific with their behavior and being able to continue to engage in it, that comes from secrecy and operating in shadows and separating kids out to get them alone somewhere. And I think they're still working on figuring that out. But Mizzy and I were talking the other day about Divine segueing into other exciting initiatives like bringing in a mountain bike program.
Right.
There's pictures of this along the way where he's doing press releases and saying, "Great news, kids. We're going on bike tours now." And there are side stories about what happened on those bike rides. We'd go off in the woods and somebody would get pulled aside and either get in trouble or beat up by one of the brothers. And then everybody was told to be quiet and somebody would be gone for 2 hours unaccounted for. So there's these sort of weird cryptic tales of bad behavior, but there's so many people involved and so many kids that I call it hiding in plain sight. Imagine being a single parent such that Sandra's mother was, and terminally ill, by the way, during all this, and going
Right.
to drop off your kid for a fun Saturday at the bike rental place with Divine and the Farwell brothers as your leaders, as you're taking you on an
Right.
adventure. And then they're in their care for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours.
What a betrayal. It reminds me a lot of the Catholic church sex abuse scandal. And
Mhm.
gives me the same feeling in my stomach, quite frankly, that these come from cops in her own town. And
I call it the ick, that feeling.
this case has the ick all over it. There is some, I don't want to say good news, but it seems like the Norfolk Attorney's office was investigating this case, but it has been taken away from that agency and is now being investigated by the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's office, which is good news, and the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. Is that your understanding as well?
Let me fill in some of the blanks on that aspect because it came out in the last civil hearing, the spokesperson for the attorney general's office. They're reasonably cryptic about their onset because they don't have to answer to us in terms of what they're doing. So there's that. But
Right,
she definitely had a lot to say, but we'll never know the exact time frame that they swooped in to say, "What,
right.
DA Morrissey, you got y'all effed up. This is
Yeah,
ours now." I don't know the exact date of that. It can be reexamined as to when they started talking about it, but the FBI, a little easier to zero in on. In fact, I have it earmarked in my notes. In the internal investigation, there's a point where William Farwell is being looked at for the CGIS inquiries. I'm sure
right,
you remember that aspect of the case where, as things were coming to a head, he was frantically running searches on himself, Sandra, and others involved. We don't because the names are redacted. So his
right,
paranoia must have been increasing. So he was running all these inappropriate searches, illegal. And at that point, Brian Holmes contacted somebody from the field office in Boston at the FBI to research that part of it. And that was
right.
in June of 2022. So June 2022, and I don't know all the terminology or all the acronyms, but there was something about a VICAP query,
Yeah.
which I believe is nationwide, like the biggest scumbag database kind of thing. I'm sure it's not
The
called biggest scumbag database.
These guys aren't the brightest bulbs either, right?
No, but
Thank God for the
Divine
investigation.
is, and make no mistake, Divine is. It gives me the ick to say that because you don't like to give people credit for being smart when what they're really doing
Right,
is using their knowledge to be predators and do evil things. So 2022 is where FBI fades into film. If you phase into the scenes, there isn't, I don't know the exact time frame about the attorney general, but they have a right to and the inclination to say, we're not going to tell you when we did that because we're gathering information because this didn't go right and we're going to fix that. There's a list of those who are looking into it. One of them that stood out to me is white collar crimes.
Right,
That's
I
its
think
own
I
unit
looked that up.
entity.
What one of the issues, if I'm not mistaken, is using these databases, police vehicles, not the normal course of police business, but to spy on Sandra and other things, correct?
Yes, and to me, I thought white collar crimes would have to do more with money, wouldn't it?
I'm just wondering if it's stolen time from the department, right?
Yes, but the state police could have investigated the theft of time
Time.
and the failure to duty.
When they were talking about that, I'm like, if they're looking into this stolen time, the investigation might be in trouble on a murder level. I think things have changed recently. And
Mhm.
one of the things I didn't know when I did the first podcast on this was Dr. Michael Baden of HBO fame is now involved and believes that this was likely a homicide. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's publicly known. It
Right.
was discussed in the news, and it is being looked into because with the death
Right.
certificate, it went from saying death by suicide to it now reflects pending. It's a revamping
Right.
of the manner of death.
That's a big step. There was something in Dr. Baden's letter about the hyoid bone being crushed, which doesn't typically happen in a hanging, especially from, I hate to be graphic, but how Sandra did it with a doorknob to the floor. The hyoid bone in the throat wouldn't be compressed in that manner, but it was. I think that's what leads Baden to say that this was a homicide. I think that's part of the reason the determination gets changed to pending. That's huge. During this time frame, I picked up the fact that there's also a wrongful death suit, a civil suit by the family in this
Yeah.
case, right?
That was the only angle that could be pursued because the investigative agencies to date, meaning the Stoughton police and the state police and the DA, failed to yield anything. There's no other recourse or alternatives. And there was definitely some stringing along in that. I just can't comprehend a family going through that chapter of it being the death of their loved one or their child, their niece,
Right.
nephew, whatever, being minimized to that degree where they're just like, "We already told you she died by suicide. It's whatever. We took 4 hours. We took some pictures and everybody agreed." And I don't think that they did agree. I think there was some dissension amongst those who were first on scene, but it was brushed off and summarily dismissed because
Right.
the reports aren't that varying. There were initial reports and tweaking them and revamping them so they weren't all over the place. If you read all 8 accounts, you can pick up what they're saying is different. They describe the mechanism or the device different, and they describe certain facets of how she appeared, like the lividity, and there was something about and the positioning. All of those things don't add up,
It
nor do the moments leading up to. It's a pattern even amongst these particular individuals that they make these claims that the second they break up with a woman or end the relationship, that they're so distraught that they have an immediate urgency to kill themselves. It's
yeah.
gross.
Jeez.
And it that and they've differed on that story by saying, "Oh, she was upset and mad, but I didn't think it was that bad." Because if he were to say, "Oh, yeah, she was freaking out and really distraught and said, 'I'm going to end my life because of you," then he would
Right.
have had even more of a duty to ensure her well-being.
So on the day that Sandra died, her boyfriend, Matt, I guess is a boyfriend, but he's a married man, correct?
Correct.
I know Sandra's found on the 4th, but on the 1st, he's the last person to see her alive. What was going on in his personal life, Suzanne, on that very day?
on that very day, Matthew was under a lot of pressure. There's a
Tell
storm
me
coming.
about what was going on with
Yeah,
his wife.
he
What
was under a lot of
Right.
pressure. There was a big storm coming, and everybody was making preparations for that. A few towns away in Newton Wellesley, he was checking his wife into labor and delivery because she was going to have their 3rd child. And so he got her situated, made arrangements for the other children, and hightailed in the blinding snow to the Canton area to visit Sandra to break up once and for all this baby that she claimed to be his, that he denied and said it's not, and said, I don't want to be in this relationship. I'm not going to be part of this. It's over. And I really mean it. This is his explaining. I told her that it was over. And then I walked out the door, got in my vehicle, deleted, deleted and blocked her on every means, communication wise, and then continued
Right.
on to the delivery room to bring a baby into the
So
bring his real baby.
let's condense that.
Mhm.
He leaves Sandra in Canton, Massachusetts to go deliver his own baby a few towns away with his wife, correct?
12 hours later, he had his new baby in his arms while Sandra was deceased in her bedroom. I have
All
to
right.
correct
That's
you, Barry, his own baby, they both were. He ended one life and hours later brought another one into
Yeah.
the world. Ended 2
Yeah.
lives, as it
Wow.
appears, allegedly.
Jeez.
And it is known, by the way, that there were conversations in the Farwell household leaning towards, yeah, this isn't gonna happen. The nuisance of this out of control,
Right.
unhinged girl and all of her claims about this baby, that's
So
not
the
gonna happen.
wife did know. Farwell's wife did know, didn't she?
She knew about the
Right.
interactions for a long time. In fact, I don't know if this was talked about previously with Mizzy, but the Farwells had Sandra babysit for their children.
This case,
Can't get
like,
any worse,
it's
and that lends right back into the grooming issue with him bringing her to the house as, "This is a kid from the program that I run. She loves kids." Bringing her over to watch the children and basically terrorize both women. That's a big control tactic for guys that engage in this kind of behavior to the degree that we can pretend to try to understand it, is keeping both
Roseanne,
women gaslit.
if you brought this as a script to a Hollywood producer, they'd laugh you out of the office. The odds of these one thing after another, right? Have that woman babysit for you. When I began researching the story, that was a rumor, but it's now been confirmed. I don't know how the wife puts up with that. I'm just trying to think of my own life. What would happen to me?
What choice do you have if you're dealing with we can safely regard he's an abusive person. He's a
Yeah,
criminal and a brutal, violent person. He did
right,
admit to the statutory rape. And it was part of his decertification. And back to your question of why has nobody been indicted or looked into on that level is beyond comprehension. He admitted to
right.
statutory rape. Mhm.
Thing there is she's not here to testify through his allegedly through his own hands, and
You might know
yeah,
better than I do, Barry, but I thought there was no statute of limitations for statutory rape, but there are a couple of variables or conditions in which a case like that can be actively pursued. I've looked
right,
through I don't have them on hand, but s this case definitely meets the criteria, like preponderance of evidence, other people who are able to
right.
corroborate it, physical evidence that point towards it. I don't know why they haven't. I also thought that pro se means the complainant doesn't need to be present or even alive, but I don't know
Yeah,
why they
hopefully that's changed. Hopefully there's some more serious charges on the way.
Maybe that's why they didn't pursue it because they're looking into him for the other big elephant in the room.
Is
But
any do you think there's any chance of one of these 3 testifying against another? It seems like the Divine thing happened at one point in time, then the Farwell brothers' abuse happened at another time over these few years. Actually, while I have you here, there's 2 brothers here, and both are accused of sexually abusing Sandra, the twins, the Farwell brothers,
correct.
right? Both of them accused of statutory rape and then whatever other indecency goes when she becomes a majority age. Can you speak to a little bit of the relationships with Matt and the other brother?
It's beyond comprehension, but the most that I could 2 things that could be viewed in that is that early on, as they were pioneers in this Explorer program and running and terrorizing the youth of Stoughton, they were like frickin' frack, separately and together, wreaking all this havoc and running this elaborate scam or scheme to apprehend people as pretend cops. And their lives drifted apart. One's in the army and the other is
Right.
comes back to be police for Wellesley. They e there's that drifting apart in time and space, but in this scenario, it really doesn't come to light until the last few months of Sandra's life that there were dates that were they were precariously everyone at the same time was in contact with her on various dates, and there's overlap, meaning one day,
Right.
Matthew and William on the same day are seeing her, communicating with her, on film
Right.
with her. I don't know about
Yeah.
simultaneously, but certainly on the same days. And this is where it circles back to divine because the last few months of this story end with dates that it can be proven and corroborated that there was an elaborate intimacy schedule, communication, tracking, sharing of what was happening amongst them and a couple of others. We know that through person who was implicated in the civil suit that is no longer. He was able to be let go from the suit.
Right.
He elucidated the means by which they were engaging in this behavior. He pointed towards the tracking and the methods and the holidays before Sandra's death. There are a couple of really important dates. There's a few days before Christmas. Most of us get weird around the holidays, but the Farwells extra weird because this is when she announced that she was expecting. Things were coming to a head. They have that fight and that argument amongst each other. The brothers fight about it. And William goes to Matthew's wife, I think either on Christmas or maybe 2 days before, to rat out Matthew for having impregnated her.
Oh,
And this can all be corroborated. I'm not going out on a limb here. These are all things that did happen and that they discussed in the investigation. They had a fight about it. William outed it to Matthew's wife. Then William went to see her and be with her. So this was December 21st, 2020. He had relations with her in that same sort of 24-hour time span that everybody's fighting and having this family drama at the Farwells.
right.
And Divine was with her that day too, all provable. This is part of what was he was pushing back on in this partial post hearing today. It was the hearing to say we
Right.
need your hearing, that he was trying
Right.
to remove himself from those interactions that have already been established. He's trying to convince the world that this whole Facebook Messenger identity that he used for messaging her.
Hold up right there.
Yeah.
Let's get into the post hearing. For those people who don't know what post is, it's the police something standards and training board. It's relatively new in Massachusetts. They've had it out on the West Coast for many years, but post regulates police conduct. And Suzanne, why don't you tell us a little bit about what happened with Divine today? I know it was a short post hearing, but they're looking to take his certification away. Is that correct?
Yes. And this is one of, I think it's probably the fourth of maybe three other hearings. And there's this one prior to this. If you haven't seen it yet, Barry, I'll send you the link because it's relatively short. But it probably had more information packed into the short hearing than the dancing around that happened today. Today's hearing
Right.
was for Divine's attorney, Robert Stowe, to make the argument that they haven't gotten all the information that they need in order to defend him properly. He said that the town's records are still working through some issues
Yeah.
with the data. He's basically
Right.
contesting that data that they did pull, that they did find out this is how he was talking with her. This is how the tracking was occurring, or this is where he was on various dates. He's trying to say that either Stoughton IT or some of the security videos or other data, that it's either wrong or they didn't authenticate it properly.
It's give me more time type of hearing so I can try to figure this out. There's going to be another hearing in December, correct?
There's one in September to, I think the judge wants to check in with everybody to see where they're at as far as the evidence goes, because the evidence is already there. The argument today by Divine and his attorney was that it's got to be wrong. Like they got all this stuff showing that he was here and he was there and he was at her apartment or that he met her at a
Right.
restaurant. One of his standard operating procedures is to say that he went to go meet a young woman at such and such restaurant to talk some sense into her or to give her advice or to comfort her after a tragedy. He's
Right.
got other stories like this. My estimation is if anyone is saying I was in the vicinity of Sandra on such and such a date, they're giving a bullshit reason to cover up for what
Right.
is already known.
Right.
They were there and it was
Right.
recorded. And
Right.
she texted back and said, "Yes, I will meet you there for a quickie," type of thing.
Yeah. And some of these quickies, so to speak, are in police cruisers in town, correct?
Most of them, and that's where the white collar aspect comes in, is that a lot of it was happening on duty and in police equipment. The cars, it was argued in one of the other post hearings that there's no real policy on that. And I wanted to come through the screen and say, "Are you kidding me? There's no
Yeah.
policy on that.
I can
There's a
imagine.
boatload of
Please.
policy on that. It's a liability for one thing. You're not even supposed to be fooling around with your own spouse in the police in the squad car."
It's just so laughable. Sometimes you see something like this, you laugh to yourself, and it hits you like a ton of bricks. I can't laugh in this case because it's like one of those infomercials. Wait, there's more.
The infomercial that you shut off because the guy is completely out of his mind on coke and talks for 20 minutes straight, and then that product drops off circulation because everything was fraudulent. It's way too much. But yeah, I hope I didn't lose you on the time frame stuff because there's so many overlapping issues, but I could tell from the post commission hearing today that the lawyer was crafting more times to try and disprove the data that's already been provided.
Yeah.
Just keeping in mind, Barry, that the tech that was used is probably by the town and the police itself, meaning the Facebook Messenger account that Divine used
Yeah.
was part of the police account. It originated in the department. So there's a couple, I would imagine that there's logistical issues as far as subpoenas go. Let me get this straight. This is the actual website based out of Stoughton Police that you ran this sock account. I don't know if that's the right term, messenger profile, but that happened with one of the other guys too, with having an Instagram account that was a departmental Instagram.
I did want to mention one thing. There's an alias that the deputy chief used. What was that? What was his
There was a lot of talk about that today, Martin Riggs.
rate?
I talked to another creator today right after
Suzanne,
that.
are they trying to ruin one of my favorite movies?
Yes, that's what the other creator said. "How dare you? That's one of my favorite movies. How could you besmirch Lethal Weapon?"
Yeah,
You
that's
know?
Mel Gibson.
The way this hearing was going and they were referencing this Martin Riggs alias, it was almost like they were trying to create a scenario where, no, it wasn't Divine, it was actually Mel Gibson. This is how far-fetched their argument is going. "What do you mean? It couldn't be him. It was really Mel Gibson." So we were joking about it because it's preposterous, and Divine had this smug look on his face, like, "You kidding me? Martin Riggs? Who would do that?" And we know you did it. We know you did it, and there's other people willing to corroborate it. There were other kids that he talked to using that, we'll call it, no misnomer or nickname, but other kids in the program have corroborated they talked to him as Marty Riggs.
Okay, so that's Divine's hearing for post. Eventually, I believe they'll take his certification. One of the Farwell brothers gave up his certification. Is that right?
Matthew voluntarily decertified. When you voluntarily decertify, you have to cop to enough that gives them a reason for your decertification. What he copped to was in an effort to say, "Yeah, I did this, but you'll never get me for what I really did." That makes my hairs stand up because it's so nerve wracking to think how many guys volunteered that they did commit statutory rape. And yet
Right.
he admits it. This is public information. And you mean to tell me that's not evidence that
Yeah.
he did it? Apparently no.
And
Um,
so that leaves one of the other Farwell brother.
William.
What's the status with post on that?
William. So he had a hearing and he wasn't present for the hearing. It was just his attorney that was on the last hearing. It was another hearing to ask for another hearing. So his status is
Right.
still pending and waiting for more discovery as far
Right.
as that goes. Did you get to see that hearing by any chance?
I didn't.
We're not big fans of his lawyer because
Really.
his lawyer during that hearing made a lot of claims, two things that are probably very important to you. He went over and above to say that Sandra Birchmore's name was not to be used as a part of these hearings and a part of this process because it's immaterial and it's inflammatory, and using her name in a hearing is just a way to try and get sympathy. He said all it does is create an inordinate amount of rage with people and sympathy that is biased towards his client. And my take on that is they want to suppress her name because the more it is said and the more outrage that's created, we could be looking at a situation where it could become a law or an act. I was thinking of Megan's Law type of scenario because these cases are the ones that legislation is built off of. It's so ugly and so out of control. You create a piece of legislation designed to help other victims. And that's probably one of their fears. So they're
Right.
arguing not to use her name in anything. To me, that's a sign of weakness and fear. They're afraid that that could really blow up their lives. And it should. The other thing William Farwell's attorney argued in the last hearing was that there's no clear cut policy on how to use the CGIS searches and the various other databases that were used and abused out of paranoia,
Right.
controlling her whereabouts or stalking and
Right.
targeting her, probably interfering with other people in her life. Like maybe she had an actual appropriate dating interest and they interfered with that. She wasn't really safe at any time, anywhere from the time that she was 11 years old, because
Right.
these three assholes were the ones looking out for her.
Yeah, they were protecting her. Yeah. Imagine that. What a betrayal.
It's
What a
such a
betrayal.
betrayal. It's such a betrayal. And so William is obviously fighting to keep the certification intact, but he's also in trouble. There's more. He's in trouble with the Department of Labor and Armed Services because he violated his oaths with the US Army by lying to get another job when he was being investigated. I don't know if you're familiar with any of the initiatives that were put into place during the Baker administration, the Brave Act and the USERRA Act that were set up to assist veterans if they were in a jam with employment, that they shouldn't just be put out to pasture and
Right,
elect to work menial jobs after serving country bravely. So it ensured them
right,
job placement at their to their at their discretion. So if
right.
you have credentials and you fought for our country, you should be able to call somebody up anytime, anywhere, and say to your commander, "Get me a job at TSA. I'm having trouble here where I live. My kids are being harassed at school, or we've got a family
Right.
emergency." So he got himself a job in Maryland through Brave and USERRA Act while he was being investigated. He got fired from it.
When I hear all these potential lower charges, like stealing overtime or misuse of a police vehicle, I'm like,
And
that's
defrauding
not
who is
it's
in
not enough.
you the the Army. I don't even know. Department of Labor is another agency that's investigating
That would
William
be the
Brownell.
FBI.
Department of Labor is already that's same time frame as the FBI is June 22, where the Department of Labor becomes an interested agency or party in this.
So just to go into my crystal ball, if the feds are investigating this to the level that we think they are, they're going to focus on the weakest link, offer one of those 3 jamokes some type of deal, even if it's to just set the stage of the grooming of what was going on with the Explorer program up until the day that February 2021. They're gonna try to give somebody a break, and I think they'll talk. Yeah. Do you agree, or how do you feel?
I've heard that somewhere once or twice. I don't know from whom, but if I were to throw my hat in the ring as far as who's in the best position or who seems to have done the most maneuvering for that, I would say William could be the queen for a day, or the proffer, if you will. He seems to have gotten himself in the best uh, position to rat out on the others and keep his nose clean.
I
And
think right.
I think that started with going to Farwell's wife and outing the pregnancy and claiming that there's a part in the redacted investigation where William, who was also intimate with Sandra around the time of the pregnancy, said he knows he's not the father because redacted. I'd really like to know
A
what that
blue
was.
chip. Right.
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think that's it. I
Vasectomy?
Yes, I think that or time-stamped video evidence or maybe different kind of sex at certain times. I'm not trying to be overly graphic about it, but whatever he said was emphatic that it's impossible that it would be me because the condom thing would be a little bit too loose of a claim because
Right.
not 100%. What
Absolutely.
they break. These guys make a lot of claims about the level of manipulation that Sandra was prone to incurring, prone to
Right.
doing. So
Right.
a condom wouldn't be foolproof because things can be done.
Right.
Uh,
So another location would be foolproof.
and being somewhere else, which he used a lot during the course of this whole 2-year thing, I can't come sit down for the internal investigation because I'm on active duty. And when I looked at that, I said, "Oh my God, did they even say to him, he's just on the Cape. He's at a training drill on the Cape. We can send a guy down there." But he was able to
Right.
use that for 10 months. He was not available. He wasn't in Kosovo. He's at the base on the Cape doing training drills.
He was in Falmouth, you
How
know?
they cleared this shit is beyond me, but he did. And then he got himself moved to Maryland to work at TSA. The language that has been used by his attorney a few times, it always sounds really selfish. my client. And
Right.
all the things that he says that are protective of his client, it alludes towards he didn't do anything, but the brother sure did. And they barely
Right.
touch on Divine, but maybe you and I have to do a whole other convo on that because there isn't enough time in a day to talk about Robert.
No, I know.
There isn't enough time in a day. And I actually, just before we got on to this recording, I found out another aspect of Divine's history that is linked to a certain DA's office. Last time he had a scandalous problem or whatever, basically cutting him loose and pretending that they didn't know him,
Really.
which I'll send to you. Yeah, it was his last scandal. It was one of those FOIA appeals that finally came to fruition. They acknowledged that Devine's gotten himself in some hot water and the press is sniffing around it. But the DA responds back to say, the chief and I have no involvement with this guy. Basically, do whatever you want. You
Right.
know,
Whatever happens.
I've never seen anything like that before about a deputy chief that was given basically
Yeah.
carte blanche to run the department.
Right.
He was definitely jockeying to be chief.
Suzanne,
Oh,
I'm going to ask you one final question. I know you got to get going, but where do you see what's the next shoe to drop in this case?
man, I dream about one of them doing a perp walk. I dream about all three of them doing a perp walk, but I think it's going to come from whatever the follow up is from the civil suit because they had an in camera review of this terabyte of horrendous data,
Right.
and that was on the 12th. I don't know what the procedurally happens, but that's
Right.
when the attorney general and all the interested parties sat down to go over all of this. So the next shoe to drop will be whatever is decided is retained as evidence or can be used in the civil suit, and it gets talked about as part of the investigation because rightfully so, the attorney general rep was argued, we're not going to show our hand as far as our investigation, but something is going to
Right.
come about with the in camera
Yeah.
review. So that next hearing is going to reveal like who's in the most trouble, so to speak. You know?
That'll be good to know. Suzanne
So
Cleveland, thanks for coming on Boston Confidential with us. And I'd say let's do it again, but that means there's something crazy in our universe.
if you have it in you to do it again, there's plenty more. There's always going to be more. This is the terrible gift that keeps on giving.
Suzanne, I just wanted to say both you and Mitzi are doing yeoman's work, and it's very heroic what you guys have done. Just the documentation you've given me and others in media I know as well. I just want to thank both of you guys for doing what you're doing. I know you're not getting paid for it, and it's got to be a bit of a burden, but you're doing an excellent job.
Thank you, Barry. Thanks for allowing your channel to have this conversation because it's a tough one to have.
All right, Suzanne, send me that other information and we'll go from there.
It was great to
And
see you.
I appreciate you coming on Boston Confidential.
Thank you.